Did you know you can start some annual flowers now in August? And this follows on from my 10 perennial flowers that you can start in August as well. Now, the difference between perennials, which is the other video, and I'll link that in the description, and annuals, which is this video, is that perennials will just grow and get bigger and continue to flower every year, whereas annuals you have to sow every year because they will grow, flower, and set seed in one full year, after which they will die. Often we think of starting annuals in the spring after the worst of the frost is past, but there are lots of annuals that you can start the previous year, such as now in August, which will give them time to grow and put on some good growth. Then they will go dormant over winter and they won't die over winter like many annuals will. And then come the spring, they'll just take off really quick and they'll flower much earlier because they had that growth to start with. That way you can also do maybe a second sowing in the spring. And so you get a longer flowering period in your garden and a longer cut flower harvest if that's what you're going for as well. And I tend to do both. I tend to like flowers in my border to have a triple purpose, attract the pollinators, and I can use them as cut flowers as well. So the annuals you're looking for are called, in the UK, they're called hardy annuals. And in the US, I think you call them cool flowers. Hardy annuals basically just means, or cool flowers just means that these are annuals that will survive the winter in certain zones. So we'll talk about the zones as well when we go through them. So in this video, we're going to do 10 annuals, hardy annuals, that will survive the winter that you can start now in August. So let's get into it. Number one is Gypsophilia. Now I started with Gypsophilia as number one in my perennial video, but this is an annual variety of Gypsophilia. So there is a perennial variety of Gypsophilia, but there's also an annual variety. It's usually the annual variety that you see in cut flowers. There's a specific one called Gypsophilia Covent Garden, which I'm going to be growing. And there's another one, there's like a pink version called Curcumina. So there's lots of different varieties you can grow, but they are annuals and they will overwinter. So you can start them now. And it is typically hardy from zones 6B to 10B, which means it will need protection from frost if you're growing it in colder zones, but that can be done with a frost cloth, a greenhouse, a hoop house, or if you were to sow them in the bottles, such as the winter sowing method. Number two is Snapdragon, everyone's favourite cut flower. Snapdragon is so easy to grow. It's a great time to start it now and overwinter it for earlier flowers. When you start Snapdragons in the sort of late winter, early spring, they just take so long to flower. That's great if you want later flowering plants, because sometimes the garden can be difficult later in the summer. But if you also want earlier flowering Snapdragons, you can start them now, the August before. Sadly, although these are hardy in my zone, they may not be hardy in yours because they're only really hardy from zones 7 through to 9. But you can overwinter them in a greenhouse or polytunnel. Sometimes I've put a bit of fleece on. Honestly, sometimes I forgot when we had a big frost and they were actually fine just in the polytunnel, even when that got hit with frost. As long as I guess it's not a prolonged hard frost, which ultimately will kill them. So in short, they do need a little bit of protection depending on your zone. But a Johnny Seeds is a zone 5 and they grow them successfully there in a polytunnel. So I guess you can too, and you can figure out your own way of protecting them over winter. But they're a really nice one to have ready for spring. And actually, just to think, just while I'm thinking on, you can actually grow Snapdragons in the winter sowing method. So you could potentially just start them now in the winter sowing method, like in a bottle or milk jug, so that they will already have that protection when it comes to winter to see them through the other side. But obviously, because they're going to grow now, you would need to give them space. So you'd need to sow them very sparingly inside those milk jugs or water bottles. Just a thought, you could try it that way if you don't have a polytunnel or greenhouse. Number 3 is Nigella. Nigella is just beautiful, airy, another cottage garden type plant. But again, you know, sometimes you're waiting till June for it to flower. So you can start it now. And the great news is this one is super hardy from zones 2 through to 11. So it's one of those ones almost anyone can grow. And it's so great to start it now, again, as I say, in August, because it will put on that growth and it'll be flowering much sooner in your garden come next year. And then you could also do a second sowing in spring again, so that you'll get a longer flowering period. It comes in a variety of colours from sort of blue to white to purple. And there's a really pretty one that I grew this year called Delft Blue, which I think is probably my favourites so far. It makes a really good cut flower because it's a slightly larger flower head as well. The seed pods are amazing as well. In their own right, they actually look attractive in the garden and they produce seeds prolifically. So once you've grown them successfully, you can harvest the seeds and you'll have them forevermore. Number 4 is another one like Nigella. It's super hardy, and that is the cornflower. You call them bachelor's buttons often in the US, and you can start them now in August for flowering next spring, early summer. They are hardy from zones 2 through to 11. So again, almost anyone can grow them. The classic cornflower colour is blue, but they now come in blacks and pinks and all sorts of different colours. So the world is really your oyster. Another really hardy one is number 5, Calendula. A lovely little plant that you can make into all sorts of creams and things. It's got so many medicinal benefits. Pollinators love it, and it kind of self-seeds in your garden. So once you've got it established, it will just self-seed itself. And also the seeds are really easy to harvest if you want to just grow them in a more controlled way in your garden. Often you think of them as being an orange flower, but you can now get them in different varieties. I just grew this year one called Snow Princess, which was kind of a more ivory colour. And there are some in kind of an apricot, that kind of antique vibe, which is kind of quite trendy at the moment for a cut flower bouquet. Number 6 is Larkspur. Larkspur is basically the annual version of the delphinium, and you can sow both now. So you can sow both your delphiniums, which is the perennial version, and that comes back every year, and Larkspur is the annual version of the delphinium and will only flower once and then it dies. They are fantastic flowers for cut flowers, but they also look beautiful in cottage gardens. They're better if they're planted in blocks for sort of more impact. They can range in height, so do be careful if you want a tall spire that you're not buying a dwarf version, and vice versa. And they come in a range of colours, from sort of soft whites and ivories right through blue, pink and purples. Number 7 is scabius. There are again annual and perennial varieties of scabius. Both are suitable for sowing now in August and overwintering in zones 3 to 7. Now, interestingly, they prefer cooler summers for flowering in. So if you are in a hotter climate, you might want to try and get them to flower in the earlier part of your season. So your spring, early summer, because they don't really like climates over a zone 7. And sowing them in August will certainly help you with that. But I grow them in my garden and I'm technically a zone 8, 9 here in the UK, and they do okay here. So I would suggest probably experimenting with them. I suspect they can probably handle it a little bit hotter than is advised. Number 8 is Ami, and the good news again is this one is super hardy. There are 2 types of Ami. There's Visnaga and there's Magus, and the Magus is kind of bigger and more airy. The flowers are more airy, and then the Visnaga is kind of a more tightly forming flower head. And in my experience of growing both, the Visnaga is smaller, so it's on shorter stems, but it's still long enough, easy for cut flowers. In terms of border position, the Visnaga is probably more of the middle of the border, whereas the Ami Magus can go at the back of the border. It grows much taller in my garden. Again, it's not fussy, it's really hardy. It can be grown in zones 2 to 11. So again, anyone can grow it. Number 9 is poppy. So all the big ornamental poppies, you get the peony poppies and things like that. They all are hardy annuals, which means you can start them now. You can also start them in early spring as well, but you can start them now. They will put on probably about 10 centimeters of growth, and then by the next spring, they will just shoot up and flower earlier. So again, it gives you opportunities to have succession sowings of poppies, because poppies notoriously don't flower for that long before the petals collapse. So it would be useful if you can grow them in succession, which of course you can, because you can start your first batch now in August. They come in a huge variety of shapes, sizes and colours, so just shop around for what you want. I've done beautiful black peony poppies and purple peony poppies. You know, I've done a load of poppies every year and they always come up fantastic, and you can sow them now in August. And last but certainly not least, believe it or not, is the sweet pea. Now, if you live in the UK, you may notice that the sweet pea will self-seed around this time of year. The seeds have ripened on the old sweet peas, the ones that have just flowered this summer. And then when they dry out, they kind of twist and pop open and scatter those sweet pea seeds all over the garden. And you will notice that sweet peas then start to grow. Now, what I tend to do is sow them and then protect them and overwinter them outside. And this tends to make a stronger, bushier plant, because if you sow them now, they get good light and it's nice and warm. So they germinate and they grow. And then when the winter hits, toughens them up, and they become stronger and bushier plants by next spring when they start to regrow and take off again. They're hardy in zones 2 to 11, but they really don't like a hot, dry spring. So if you live in a climate where your spring quickly transitions into a hot summer, then this is a real advantage starting them in October or September the year before, because it means that they're going to flower sooner before it gets too hot. Here in the UK, we have long, wet, cool springs, which makes the sweet peas go wild, crazy, lush, bushy, and then they start to produce those beautiful flowers. Once it starts to get really hot and dry, the sweet peas will start to degrade and peter out, and they just won't look as good. So if you have that kind of climate that has a hot, that is a very short spring that transitions very quickly into a hot summer, this could give you a real advantage to get your sweet peas flowering earlier by starting them this side of winter. So I hope that video helped, and if you want to know about my 10 perennials that you can start in August, then of course I'll link that video in the description below this video. And if you found it helpful at all, then please consider subscribing, liking, sharing with anyone you think might find it helpful, and I'll see you again in my next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.